Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the very first scene for Tokyo by Night, Japan by Night's Kindred of the East venue. We open up in the middle of the city, in one of the typical sort of seedy neighborhoods that most people, if they can help it, tend to try to avoid. As the sun sets and the city is only momentarily cloaked in darkness before neon light after neon light, bearing various symbols in kanji and katakana, come on, we focus on a certain young woman who is currently approaching this place. Her name is Hitomi, and she has a certain fire in her eyes, a certain vengeance at the moment. Would you like to describe to us what happened to bring Hitomi here, of all places?
I think I can. Um, the Ichimonji sisters, Hitomi and Fumiko, have been through quite a bit in their time. Their raising was something that's been, many would describe as troubled. But Hitomi, for her part, managed to find herself in a position where she was becoming a respectable woman. Perhaps not in the sort of good and proper way of honest work, but within the circles that her husband ran in, her adoptive father, so to speak, her father-in-law, she was considered a very respectable woman. And in the midst of getting ready to start her family, after helping her younger sister, Fumiko, get clean and get away from a man who pimped her out for drugs and his own amusement. Um, Hitomi came home to discover that familiar scent of drugs and sex in all places of her home where her family was soon to start, where her sister would have been the beloved aunt that lived with them, and they would have lived a happy life. But that betrayal, after everything that they'd been through, was far too much. So going to her father-in-law and her husband and begging for retribution and to be allowed to be part of it, this normally demure and very traditional housewife type has awoken up a fire that has been dormant since the days that she was a high school student, dealing with the abuses of an alcoholic father. And so now that this fire has spilled over and has caused a raging inferno within her, she has come here to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to cause a great deal of pain and suffering for two individuals and anyone willing to get in her way.
As Hitomi ruminates on this anger and this pure, unbridled hatred, the backup that she had gotten waits almost impatiently as they stare at the doors of this drug house, this place where some of their lower ranking people had pointed out Yujiro to be. As look onto it, occasionally people shuffle in, shuffle out. The ones that shuffle out often stumbling, trying unsuccessfully to hide inebriation.
As Hitomi clutches on to the grip of a bat, she looks over to Satoshi, who's more than likely one of the few people in this area in quite some time, besides police officers, is clutching a firearm. And she lowers her head. I know it's not my place to be so shamefully angry, but I'm grateful that you are letting me take part in this.
The biggest guy with tattoos down each arm, who appears to be the leader of this squad, just nods. Anything boss's daughter and granddaughter.
She nods. And she stands there and looks at the door and looks at the men standing around. She looks over at her husband before simply nodding to him so he can give the order, because being the good wife she is, she will not dare give the order. It's not her place to.
As she nods, he returns the nod very, very seriously, waits a couple more moments, and then says, "Surround the place. Get inside." And the gentleman will follow orders, some going in through the nearest side, some circling around all the way to the back, each one clutching in their hands either a makeshift bludgeoning weapon, a kanabo, a baseball bat, maybe one or two with firearms.
Hitomi stands there waiting in the rain and looks up towards the sky, looking at the storm clouds for a moment.
Husband will reach over and he puts a hand on her shoulder, opens his mouth as if he's to say something. But before anything gets out, Hitomi's momentarily blinded, deafened by a massive crash of thunder that lights up the sky for a moment.
I suppose in that flash then, as sort of the brightness sort of fills her vision with white, it's enough of a trigger for her vision to go somewhat red as she picks up the bat and she walks inside gracefully with not a hurried pace but a purposeful pace. What does she see when she walks inside?
She walks inside, and the place doesn't appear to be terribly complex. There's a very small hallway leading into one very large room that she can see. There are a couple of young women there, lounging. Only one of them appears to be actually dressed. The other two preferred to sit there smoking in their underwear. The one who is wearing clothes stands up and approaches Hitomi with as much of an intimidating swagger as she can manage, and she says, "What are you doing in here? This isn't your house."
In Hitomi's mind, about 1,000 different retorts, all of them derisive, come to mind in a jumble, sort of 1,000 words trying to fit through a door that could fit maybe 20 all at once. And that that stemming that stemming of the tide of all the things that she wants to say, which might have helped the situation end relatively peacefully, to get everything off her chest and maybe talk her sister sense into her sister. That doesn't happen. She simply waits for her sister to finish and nods only once before she takes the baseball bat and slams it into her sister's knee as hard as she is able.
As Hitomi slams the bat into her knee, she hears the sickening crack and pop of her kneecap being slid out of place as her sister lets out a horrified shriek and drops to her one good knee, clutching this one. What the fuck are you doing?
Hitomi stands over Fumiko, just mute, and is Fumiko sort of got one hand flat on the ground?
Yeah.
Hitomi will raise the bat up and slam it down into her sister's fingers.
You hear her fingers pop under the sudden impact. She lets out another cry of pain and confusion, finds herself doubling over again. Tears start to flow liberally down her face as she hyperventilates, whispering, "What the fuck? What the fuck?"
My home was pure, and you defiled it. And she will take the bat and slam it into her sister's stomach.
As the bat hits her stomach, she retches, leans forward, and a mixture of blood and vomit pour out of her mouth and land on the floor. She lets out a whimper, pathetically, as it drips down her chin. She doesn't look back up at you.
If you are entirely incapable of getting yourself clean, I will remove that drug. And she will shout out, probably overstepping her bounds to her husband's men, but at this point, caught up in the moment, she shouts out, "Bring me Yujiro. Bring him to me."
The men hesitate for a moment as she shouts out this order. But as Hitomi looks around, she simply sees her husband give a nod, his arms crossed as he refuses to look at who he thought was going to be a sister-in-law, the caring aunt to his child. After his go-ahead is given, the men begin searching the building. They practically tear it apart, completely unnecessarily. Bookshelves toppled over, desks drawn through, drugs poured on the ground. The place is thoroughly ransacked before a pair of them come holding gentlemen in their arms. They have one of each of his arms, and he is on his knees as they drag him. His clothes are mostly undone, though they were partially thrown on. His belt is undone, his shirt undone, and he reeks of sex as he's brought in here. Shortly behind him, two more men drag a half-naked woman. They throw both of them to your feet. One of the Yakuza men gives a bit of a snicker as he points. Says, he was too busy fucking her in the back. He didn't hear a thing.
On any other occasion, there might have been ire that came towards the men that spoke in such a way. At least in her presence, but not now. She simply points to Fu and asks that she be held up and made to watch.
What do you want us to do with her? They say as they hold up the prostitute.
Nothing. Leave her there on her knees.
You sort of drop her in the corner of the room, one of the men training a gun on her. As the ones that were holding her now go to pick up Fu. They hold her up by her armpits as she winces in pain as once again stress is put on her shattered knee. They hold her in a standing position, and the other two hold up her boyfriend, or who she considers her boyfriend.
Fu reaches down into her pocket and pulls out a butterfly knife. She opens it up and grabs both handles. As she walks up to Ujiro, and she stares at him for a moment, just looking directly into his eyes to see if there's any hint of anything but a snake behind them.
He doesn't sob and cry so much as Fu does, but just glares at you.
She will spit in his face.
Leans back a bit at that, clearly disgusted. His face sort of contorts into a snarl. He says, "You're not gonna fucking do it. Women don't murder."
She motions for the man training the gun on the prostitute to bring the woman to his to where Ujiro is.
He sort of gestures with the gun, and the woman, frightened and wide-eyed, follows his order to a T. He is very clearly shaken.
She puts the knife sort of halfway in her pocket, still with the blade out, and she picks up the bat again. And without breaking eye contact from Yujiro, she takes the bat and just tees off on the prostitute's head with the full intent of caving it in one single shot.
As she swings, the woman's head jerks back violently, and you hear a loud crack coming from her neck as she falls backwards She doesn't appear to be dead, but she doesn't move, instead staring up at you, tears in her eyes, drooling a bit.
She looks down at the woman and she begins to bring the bat down again. And again. And again. About 10 times in total.
It only takes 2 swings to hit her hard enough to kill her. But as you keep wailing on her head, keep smashing it, essentially like a watermelon, it falls apart and bits and pieces of it stick to the carpet, stick to your bat. As you beat what's left of her face into an unrecognizable mush hanging off of the base of her neck. Even some of the men that came with you look concerned, worried, a bit queasy as you do this, and the stench of blood and death begin to fill the air. Who has begun screaming.
She'll take the bat and just rub the sort of completely soiled side of it along Ujiro's right cheek, looking him straight in the eye, looking for that moment to see if he's broken yet, if he's realized exactly what he's brought down upon his head by defiling her home.
He is shocked and silent. His eyes wide and his pupils just pinpricks as he refuses to look down at the woman that he was intimate with only moments ago. Now a lifeless, headless corpse. Shaken, Tommy, and just mouths the words, "I'm sorry."
I didn't hear that. Say it again.
He looks like he attempts to speak, but when he opens his mouth and breathes in, he gags. His eyes watering, he shakes his head and looks up. This time, not much more than a whisper. "I'm sorry, Hitomi-san."
She'll drop the bat and take his cheekbones in between her left hand and look at him.
He winces a bit as you touch him.
Your attempt at an apology is appreciated. And she uses the other hand to drive the knife in through his ribcage.
As she shoves it in, he lets out a gasp of air. And as it is pulled out, she feels the blood start to pour from his side as he gasps over and over again, searching for words that won't come. He tries to yank his hand free to cover the wound, but the Yakuza member holds him tightly. He groans in pain as he ceases struggling.
And as she looks at the blade, thoroughly covered in blood, when she flicks it back to start a second strike, she's doing it she does it almost intentionally to flick Yujiro's blood back in Fu's direction. And she starts to do it again and again and again and again. Stomach, neck, side, ribs.
The entire time, Fu screams until she's hoarse. When she can't scream anymore, she sobs silently. She keeps trying to look away, but finds herself unable to, as he's stabbed, cut, and sliced, far past the point he stops moving. And as everybody's staring in awe of this almost frenzy-like whirlwind of blade, one of the women, left cowering in the corner, manages to steal the gun out of one of the Akuzumen's hands. The last thing that Hitami hears is a gunshot as she feels an incredibly sharp pain in her side. She sees red spread over her body as the wound leaks and leaks and leaks. Perhaps the last thought that goes through her head is of her child.
She, as she falls, the one thing that she utters out to, I'm guessing, Satoshi, who would probably come and grab a hold of her.
It's a blurry whirlwind, a mixture of gunshots, yelling, the scream of her husband as he grabs her and holds her tightly, trying in vain to reassure her that she's going to make it, that it's going to be fine. We have someone who can patch you up. And his voice slowly starts to unfocus until all Fu can hear is droning as his face starts to get blurry in her vision.
If able, she'll just utter out the words, "Don't let her live."
And as she manages to squeeze out that last syllable, everything goes black. It feels like it's black for a long time. That sort of nothingness and a cold void. Till eventually Fu finds herself. She's standing in a massive, sort of craggy, rock-like area with winds that bite and heat that licks at her skin.
She stands up and sort of coils her hands to herself to cover her arms and shoulders, sort of tilting her head to one side to brace against the winds and keep her eyes as narrowed as possible. And she calls out for Satoshi.
She's met with nothing but the howling winds, though as she gains consciousness, she starts to move. The winds pick up to the point they slice her skin like thousands of razor blades going over her. She sees her skin separate, the blood and muscle get torn, only to stitch itself back together, rip itself back open, and continue onward. The pain is unlike anything she had ever experienced. It's nothing compared to the gunshot in her side. Nothing compared even to the pain of realizing her home was defiled. There are no words for how bad it is.
It drops her to her knees as she tries to crawl forth, as I'm guessing any semblance of clothing is just ripped away from her, and she's left crawling forward as starkly naked as she was when she came into the world.
Yep.
And any rational thought that was in her mind just beckons her to curl up, find a rock to hide against, and to take shelter. But everything
It's
about
as though every time Hitomi hides, finds something to protect her from the winds shift directions. She hears a loud, booming, sort of cruel laughter as she's toyed with, each time given only a second of safety, of clarity, before the pain and the torture begins again. She feels this go on for so long she loses track of the concept of time. And yet, each time the wind changes, it brings a new kind of pain. Slicing, burning, buffeting. Some deep soul pain that she'd never experienced in the world that was new to her. As she continues to wander, desperate for some shield from it, her eyes land upon the first bright thing she had seen since coming here, as a trail of burning lotuses and a massive bonfire stretch out in front of her.
in that moment there is probably all sense of self-preservation, self-determination is been ground down to its dullest point, and her rational thought probably would much rather just succumb to whatever it is and give up. But from each time the wind changes and brings a new pain with it, the anger and anguish and years of repressed hatred that she can vaguely remember now come forward. And even though she's on scarred hands and knees, she begins to crawl towards these lotuses.
She crawls forth desperately as the winds tear at her. She manages to follow the path, the distance between each lotus only looking like a few feet, but feeling like miles. She continues forth until she finds herself standing in front of that raging bonfire. Its heat matching the intensity of the burning anger and hatred within.
She'll look at it and she'll huddle herself onto her knees right up against the perimeter of it and just stare into it.
The fire provides little comfort against the winds, but it never seems to go out, never seems to succumb to them. It blazes massive and bright. As little Fu focuses, she looks into it. She starts to see the flames take shape, showing her images from her past, from what led her here. And then it shows her something else, her own body hanging from chains next to her sisters.
Unsure how to respond, she looks into the fire. How clear do these images appear to Hitomi?
They start out blurry, but as she looks harder, looks deeper, they start to get relatively clear as if only put through some sort of filter. They look like she could reach out and touch them if she wanted to.
Having endured this much pain, perhaps tired of the spiritual and emotional tortures that have come with this place, she'll sort of drive her hand through and attempt to pull herself into that image, into those flames. At this point, she's probably half convinced through ignorance or trial and error that whatever power that be here will not let her die. That would be a reprieve.
The flames scorch and burn her skin as she forces her way through, each millimeter sending racking, flaming pain throughout her body. But she finds herself soon falling through the fire. Haphazardly, she flails about as she searches for grounding. Everything darkens once again. She finds herself not completely enveloped in pain. She finds herself hanging with her eyes closed. The strain from the chains on her body being the only pain she feels now.
That reprieve is probably bliss at this point by comparison. And she sort of hangs there with her eyes closed, sort of just savoring just this momentary lapse each time that she was able to find shelter before it was cruelly taken away from her. Each one of those brief moments sort of a tease. And as these moments continue to linger on, she begins to shake her head. In her mind now, this is just a calm before the storm, a trap meant to take down the walls that she's put up around her own being to merely just exist in whatever this place is. So she sort of screams out and tries to open her eyes.
She opens her eyes, and as she does, she sees a dark, blackened figure of herself, sharp teeth, spikes, horns, smoldering red eyes as it follows her into her body. And as she feels it become one with her, a deep, rage and hunger joins her. She looks around and she sees her mother standing over her. And she whispers, "Little Fu, wake up. You have so much to do." And with that, I believe we're going to end this prologue. Thank you, player, for playing. Thank you, watchers, for watching. This has been a scene for Tokyo by Night, Kindred of the East.